There is a photograph, near 100 years old, of a barefoot boy standing on a mud bank with a cane pole in one hand and a stringer of bass in the other. The stringer is almost as tall as he is. 6, 7 fish, each one thick as a loaf of bread. That boy did not own a reel. He did not own a tackle box. He had a cut pole, a length of line, a hook, and whatever he could dig or catch for bait. And he is standing there with a stringer that would cost a grown man a small fortune to fill today. Now here is the thing that ought to bother you. That boy's great-grandson can walk down to that very same bank with $300 of rods in his truck and a screen that draws him a map of the bottom, and go home with nothing. Skunked. Not a single fish. So ask yourself the honest question. The bass did not get smarter. The water did not change. So what did? What did that barefoot boy know, standing on the mud with a stick, that a grown man with a truck full of gear does not? That is what we are fixing today. Because catching a bass was never supposed to be hard, friend. It was never supposed to be expensive. It was made to feel that way. And by the time we are done here, you will be able to walk up to almost any pond, lake, or river in this country, with next to nothing in your hands, and catch a bass. Even if you have never caught a fish in your life. There are 7 keys to it. 7. 6 of them your grandfather could have shown you in an afternoon on the bank. The 7th, the one that actually made him deadly on the water. The one that put fish on the stringer when every other man on the lake went home empty. That is the one nobody teaches anymore. And it is the one we build to. I am Simon Mercer, 7th generation on this water. My people have fished this same stretch since the 1790s, and I have never once bought the fish that fed my table. I took it from here. Everything I am about to hand you, my grandfather I set down in a leather journal before he passed, and he made me swear the old ways would not die with me. This is me keeping that word. And none of it got forgotten by accident, neighbor. The tackle trade, the bait companies, the electronics men, they built a whole industry on top of you believing you cannot catch a fish without them. I will name it plainly as we go. Because the truth is, a largemouth bass is one of the easiest big fish in this whole country to catch. Once you know the handful of things that boy on the bank knew for free. Tap subscribe before we start. Not for me. Because we are pulling one buried skill back into the daylight every week now. And you are going to want the next one they would rather you kept paying to go without. Before we get into it, there is something coming for folks who fish, and the tackle shops will not say a word about it, because the day it lands is the day they stop making money off you. It comes down to one thing. There is a generation of us who can still just barely remember a grandfather who walked down to the water with a can of corn and a hand line and came home with supper. And there is a generation coming up right behind us who has been taught you cannot catch a fish without $300 of gear and a screen that tells you where they are. The knowing is one funeral away from gone, so I put it down. Everything Ely copied into that leather journal, and everything I have added to it in 40 years on this water. How to read a river. How to find fish without a single battery. The cheap baits that out fish the dear ones. How to bait a spot, how to cure and keep what you catch, and how to read the sky and the water the way he taught me. I'm 90 odd pages of it in one book, Hanam Doobo Kololoja link right below this video. All right, back to it. The first key is the one that matters more than every rod and reel ever built, and it is the one a beginner never gets told. It is not what you throw. It is where you throw it, because a bass is not a fish that wanders the open water looking for a meal. A bass is an ambush hunter. It sits hidden in the shadows, and it waits for its dinner to swim past. Your great-grandfather knew this in his bones. He never wasted a cast on bare, open water. He walked the bank and he read it, the way a man reads a room he is about to walk into. And what he was looking for was cover. Anything a fish could hide behind, under, or inside. Here is how you read it today. Look for 3 things in this order. First, the wood. A fallen tree lying in the water, a stump, a half-sunk log, branches breaking the surface. Bass love wood more than almost anything. Second, the green. Weed beds, lily pads, reeds along the edge. Any thick water plants. A bass will bury itself in that green and wait. Third, the edges and the shade. The shadow line under an overhanging tree. The dark water beside a dock. The point where deep water meets shallow, the drop-off. Bass live on edges. Wood, green, shade. That is the whole of it. And the fisheries biologists, the folks who study these fish for a living, will tell you the exact same thing the old man knew from the bank. A largemouth bass relates to cover and structure. It lives and dies by the ambush. That is not a mountain rumor, friend. That is the science agreeing with your grandfather 100 years late. Now here is how this skill got quietly taken from you. Nobody outlawed it. What happened was slower than that. The industry figured out it could sell you a machine that finds the fish for you, a screen full of arrows and colors, and once a man is staring at a screen, he stops looking at the water. He stops learning to read it. A whole generation grew up thinking the fish are wherever the electronics say, and never learned that a $5 eye for cover beats a $500 box 9 times out of 10. The failure mode here is the beginner who stands in one open spot and fires cast after cast into the middle of the lake, into dead water, and wonders why he never gets a bite. The fish are not in the middle. They are tucked against that log 10 feet to his left that he never even looked at. So do this today. Walk the bank before you make a single cast. Find the wood, the green, the shade, and put your very first cast right up against it, close enough to touch. That one change, casting at cover instead of at open water, will catch you more bass than any lure you could ever buy. The second key is when. Because the same pond that seems dead as a parking lot at noon can come alive at the right hour, and a beginner who does not know this quits fishing right before the fish start biting. A bass hates the bright, high sun. It has no eyelids, and in the glare it pulls back deep into the shade and goes still. But in the low light, early in the morning as the sun comes up, and again in the last hour before dark, the bass move up out of the shadows and into the shallows to hunt. Eli had a saying, "Fish the edges of the day. Dawn and dusk are worth more than all the hours in between. The other half of when is the warmth. A bass is cold-blooded, so its whole life runs on the temperature of the water. In the cold of deep winter it goes sluggish and deep and barely feeds. But as the water warms through the spring, the bass come up into the shallows to feed and to spawn, and that warm shallow water in spring and early summer is the easiest bass fishing of the whole year. A gray, warm, overcast day can have them feeding from morning to night. The state wildlife folks who manage these lakes will tell you the same. Bass feeding follows light and water temperature. Low light and warming water bring them up shallow. The science, once again, catching up to the old man on the bank. Here is the failure mode, and it is a heartbreaker. The beginner goes out at high noon on a blazing bright day, fishes for 2 hours in the worst light there is, catches nothing, and decides he is no good at fishing and packs the whole idea away for good. He never lost. He just showed up at the wrong hour. So do this today. Do not fish the middle of a bright day. Go at first light or go in the evening as the sun drops. Be on the water when the light is low, and you have already doubled your chances before you have made a cast. Everything so far, the where and the when, your great-grandmother could have walked you through in one morning on the bank. What comes next is where the industry has its hooks in you the deepest, and where I am going to save you the most money you will save all year. The third key is your gear, and I am going to set you free from something. You do not need the wall. You know the wall I mean. You walk into the tackle shop, and there is a whole wall of rods, a whole wall of reels. 10,000 lures in every color God ever made, and it is built, every inch of it, to make you feel that catching a fish is complicated and expensive. It is neither. Here is all you need to start, and all your grandfather would have used if they had made it in his day. One rod of medium power, around 6 or 7 feet long. One spinning reel to match it, the open-faced kind with the little wire bail, because it is the easiest reel in the world for a beginner to learn. And line of around 10 to 12 pounds. That is it. That single outfit will land you nearly every bass you will ever hook, and it will cost you a small fraction of what that wall wants from you. Ely fished most of his life with one rod he trusted. He used to say a man who owns 20 rods and cannot rid the water will be out, fished by a boy with one rod who can. The gear was never the thing. The gear was never the thing. And here is the honest word on how they got you. There is no money in telling a man he already has enough. There is a fortune in convincing him he is one more purchase away from finally catching fish. So every year there is a new rod, a new reel, a new miracle lure. And the beginner keeps buying, keeps believing the fish are behind the next thing on the shelf. The knowledge that you need, almost nothing could not be sold, so it was quietly allowed to die. The failure mode is the new fisherman who spends $500 before he has caught a single bass. Gets overwhelmed by gear he does not understand, tangles himself in it, and gives up, certain that fishing is too hard for him. He drowned before he ever learned to swim, in tackle he never needed. So do this today. If you are just starting, buy one medium spinning combo. Do not buy the wall. Walk past it. One rod, one reel, good line. You are ready. The fourth key is what you tie on the end. And here too the truth is smaller and cheaper than they want you to believe. There are thousands of lures on that wall. You need about 4. Maybe fewer. These are what old hands call confidence baits, the few that catch bass anywhere in the country, in any water, year after year. The first, and if you learn only one, learn this one, is the soft plastic worm. A simple rubber worm, rigged so the hook tucks back into the body where it cannot snag, which lets you drag it right through the wood and the weeds where the bass live. It looks like nothing, and it out fishes almost everything. The second is a spinnerbait, that little wire bait with the spinning blades, which you can throw out and just wind slowly back. And the flash and the thump call bass in from a distance, perfect for a beginner. The third is a topwater lure, something that floats and gurgles across the surface at dawn, because there is nothing in all of fishing like watching a bass explode on a bait right on top. And the fourth, the one nobody wants to admit still works best of all, is live bait. A night crawler or a live minnow under a simple float, cast next to cover, will catch a bass when nothing fancy will. Your grandfather did not think that was cheating. He thought it was supper. The failure mode is the beginner with a box of 200 lures who has no idea which to tie on, changes baits every 5 minutes in a panic, and never leaves any one of them in the water long enough to catch anything. 4 baits fished with patience beats 200 fished in a fluster. And Ely put this on one of the last pages of that journal, and it is in the book too, but you do not need the book to do it tonight. Pick one bait, tie it on, and leave it on long enough to believe in it. So do this today. Start with the plastic worm, rigged weedless, or a worm under a float if you want it simpler still. One bait worked slow, right against the cover. That brings us to the 5th key, which is how you actually work the bait, and this is the single most common mistake I see a beginner make. They reel too fast. Way too fast. They cast out, and they wind it straight back in like they are in a hurry to be somewhere, and the bait comes racing past the fish before a bass can even think about it. Slow down. That is the whole lesson, and it is worth more than any bait in the box. A bass wants an easy meal, something wounded, something struggling. So with that plastic worm, you cast it to the cover, and you let it sink all the way to the bottom, and you barely move it. A little lift of the rod tip, let it fall back down, and wait. Most of your bites will come as it falls. With the spinnerbait, wind it just fast enough to feel the blades turning, and no faster. With the topwater, twitch it, and then let it sit dead still, and wait, because the bass is looking at it, working up its nerve. The old man had a phrase for it. He said you have to fish slow enough to bore yourself, because the moment you get bored is usually the moment right before the bite. Patience is the bait the tackle shop cannot sell you. The failure mode is the fast reeler, the beginner who cannot stand to let the bait sit, who yanks it back at full speed and calls the water empty. The water was not empty. He just never gave a single fish the half second it needed to decide. So do this today. Whatever you throw, cut your speed in half. Then cut it in half again. Let the bait sink, let it sit. Make it easy for the fish to say yes. The sixth key is the bite and the hook set, the moment it all comes together, and it is the part a beginner is most afraid of getting wrong. Do not be. It is simpler than the fear. First, learn what a bite feels like, because it is not always the big yank you are picturing. Often, especially on that plastic worm, a bite is just a tap, a tick up the line, or the line simply starts to swim off to one side, or it goes strangely light, or it feels suddenly heavy, like you snagged a wet sock. Any of that is a fish. Ely taught it as this: if it feels different, it is a fish until you prove it is not. When you feel that bite, here is what you do. Reel down until your line comes tight to the fish, point the rod at it, and then sweep the rod up and back firmly, in one smooth, strong motion to drive the hook home. Not a wild panic jerk that snaps your line. A firm, deliberate sweep. And with a plastic worm, give the fish just a breath 1 second to take it properly into its mouth before you set. With a fish that hits a moving bait like a spinnerbait, it often hooks itself, and you just come tight and lift. The failure mode is the beginner who feels that first strange tap, gets excited, and rips the rod back so hard and so early that he pulls the bait clean out of the fish's mouth or breaks off entirely. Steady. Feel it come tight, sweep firm. That is a hooked bass, so do this today. Next time your line does anything strange, anything at all, treat it as a fish. Reel down and sweep. You will miss a few at first. Then it will click, and you will wonder how you ever missed it. Now, everything up to here you can do with your hands and your eyes and the cheap gear in front of you. But the seventh key is the one this whole video has been building toward, because it is not in your hands at all. It is in you. It is the piece that made your great-grandfather deadly on water where other men starved. And it is the one thing no company on earth can ever sell you. The seventh key is this: you are the fish finder. Long before there was a screen with arrows on it, there was a man who could stand on a bank and read the whole story of the water in front of him with nothing but his own eyes and his own stillness. And you can become that man. Here is how, in 3 parts. First, stealth. A bass in shallow water is a nervous, spooky animal, and it can feel you coming. It feels your heavy footsteps drumming through the ground and the bank. It sees your shadow fall across the water. It sees your arm waving against the sky. So you move slow and low. You keep off the skyline. You do not stump. You approach the water like you are sneaking up on it, because you are. Half the beginners in this country spook every fish in the shallows before they ever make a cast, and never know they did it. Second, watch the water. Before you fish, just look. A swirl on the surface is a fish feeding. A little shower of tiny baitfish scattering is a bass driving them up from below. A slurp. A ring, a shadow sliding under a lily pad. The water is telling you where the fish are and what they are doing, in a language your grandfather read fluently, and you can learn in a single season of paying attention. Third, feel the day and change with it. If the shade is not producing, try the sun. If slow is not working, try a little faster. If this cover is dead, move to the next. The old man never sat in one dead spot all day blaming the fish. He read what the water was giving him, and he answered it. That is the whole art. And it is the one the industry needs you to forget the very most, because everything else they can sell you a substitute for. This they cannot. The failure mode of the modern beginner is the man who stares at a screen instead of the water, or who marches up to the bank loud and careless, spooking everything, and then trusts a machine to undo what his own 2 boots just ruined. The machine cannot give you back what stealth and attention would have handed you for free. So do this today. Before your next cast, stop. Stand still for 1 full minute and just watch the water. You will see something you would have walked right past. That is the beginning of becoming the fish finder yourself. So go back, now, to that barefoot boy on the mud bank with the stringer nearly as tall as he is. You know who that boy is. That is Eli. Long before he was the old man with the leather journal, he was a boy who had never been told fishing was hard, or expensive, or complicated. He just read the water, put an easy meal in front of a hidden fish, stayed quiet, and stayed patient. 7 keys, though he never called them that. He just called it fishing. And now they are yours. You walk the bank and you find the wood, the green, the shade. You go at the edges of the day, in the low light and the warm water. You carry one simple rod and a handful of honest baits. You fish it slow enough to bore yourself right against the cover. You feel the bite, and you sweep firm and true. And above all of it, you become the fish finder, quiet and watchful, reading the water with your own eyes the way that boy did 100 years ago. This was never really about bass, friend. It was about the difference between a man who can feed himself from any water he walks up to, and a man who has been convinced he cannot catch a thing without permission and a receipt. Your great-grandfather did not have a screen to find his fish, because he was the finder. That is not nostalgia. That is sovereignty, and it is standing right there in the water waiting for you, and it costs almost nothing but the willingness to learn it. You do not have to master all 7 keys this week. Do one. This weekend, walk down to any water near you, find the nearest bit of cover, and put one slow bait right against it in the low light of morning. That is the whole first step, and you will have done more than most men who own a boat. Your grandfather knew all of this. Somebody just never got the chance to pass it down to you. That is what I am here for. Tell me down below, did your grandparents fish? Did somebody teach you to read the water before you ever picked up a rod? Or did that piece not quite make it to you either? The skill that gets the most stories in the comments is the one I go deepest on next. Next time, the one cheap bait sitting in your kitchen right now that has fooled more big bass than any lure ever made. And the reason the tackle companies would rather you never remembered it was there. Keep the old ways, friend. They will keep